ಅವರನ್ನು ಒಂದು ನೆಟ್ವರ್ಕಿಗೆ ತರುವಂತಹ ಕೆಲಸವನ್ನು ಗೌರಿ ಅವರು ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರು. ಆ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವರು ಕೊಲೆ ಆದರೇನು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಪ್ರಾಸ್ತಾವಿಕ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನು ಆಡಿದಂಥ ದೀಪು ಅವರು ಹೇಳಿ. ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ದೀಪು. ಇದೀಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಗೌರಿ ಮೆಮೋರಿಯಲ್ ಟ್ರಸ್ಟ್ನ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರಾದಂತಹ ತೀಸ್ತಾ ಸೆಟಲ್ವಾಡ್ ಅವರು ಈ ದಿನದ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ಕುರಿತು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಕೆಲವು ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನು ಹಂಚಿಕೊಳ್ಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
It's 5 years since we lost Gauri, around 8:39 p.m. 5th September, and I know what Gauri would have been thinking if she was with us today. She would have been extremely worried about the last 70 days when I was violently detained and then incarcerated in the Sabarmati Women's Jail, Ahmedabad. And I thought of her when I was there, and I thought about the fact that she would have wanted to speak to me about the conditions of women living in jails. What is the access to justice? How fair is the treatment? What does institutionalization mean for women who just get picked up sometimes because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time? Bail is denied for several years. My experience in the Sabarmati Women's Jail was extremely worrying because I was there from July 2nd till September 3rd and to 2022, and I saw that the impact of the entire COVID paralysis for the access to justice had impacted women's ability not to get bail and just be incarcerated without bail in jail. What are conditions like when you are in a women's prison? You're from outside the state of Gujarat, you can't speak the local language maybe, can't understand the local language maybe. You're allowed maybe one mulaqat a week with family, but you can't meet anybody who's not a blood relation. So if for instance you're from say Punjab or Maharashtra or Telangana or Kerala and you've been picked up and put inside as an under trial for a crime, you can't use that legally available mulaqat to meet a friend or somebody once a week from the city of Ahmedabad unless he or she is a blood relative. The jail manual is a constant quote back from the authorities when we ask for using the library or the study center. There's a decent library actually, the women's jail, 18-seater library. The books are not great, but if you want to sit and write and reflect and be in a silent space, it's possible to sit in the library. But it's not kept open on a regular basis because somehow calm reflection and writing are not a priority for the authorities. I really feel that talking on the 5th of September, unfortunately I'm not with all of you today in Bengaluru, is that we really need as citizens, as civil society, as human rights activists, as political movements, to look at what institutionalization does to women under trials, women prisoners, what is the political economy of the prison. The Sabarmati jail in Ahmedabad is run by 20 women convicts. All the manual labor, all the slave labor, they are handling, they are cooking for us, cleaning, they are weeding, they are running the gate, and they are paid pittance for this. 15th of August 2022 was the 75th year of India's independence. I spent that inside jail. And all of us women were expecting that with the Har Ghar Tiranga slogan program of the central government, the jail would have a flag hoisting at least. There was nothing for us in the women's jail at Sabarmati Ashram. And that day about 17 women convicts who had crossed 14 years in prison had been anxiously waiting for their remission mercy sentences. We have the names, we are going to run a campaign for them because we believe they should have been let out on the 15th of August. They've been waiting anxiously since 2017. Unfortunately, shockingly, 11 convicts of the Bilkis Banu shocking mass rape and murder were released by the state government of Gujarat on the 15th of August this year. But the 17 women convicts in the Sabarmati Women's Central Jail who are anxiously waiting for their remission mercies petitions and sentences to be accepted still continue in prison. Unfortunately, justice in our country is lopsided, it's perverted, it's inside out sometimes. And I think the time has come on the 5th of September 2022, the 5th anniversary of Gauri Lankesh's brutal assassination, for us to seriously begin a campaign for prison reform and jail reform. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry I'm not with you today.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ಲೈಟ್ಸ್. ಇದೀಗ ಈ ನಾಡಿನ ಖ್ಯಾತ ಗಾಯಕರಾದಂತಹ ಜನ್ನಿಯವರಿಂದ ಒಂದು ಹಾಡು.
ಈ ಹಳೆಯದಾಗ ಅಂಟಿರೋ ಕೊಳೆಯನ್ನು ಶುದ್ಧ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಗೌರಿ ಧ್ವನಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದು. ನಮಗೆ ಸಮಾನತೆ ಬೇಕು, ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಬೇಕು, ನಮಗೆ ನ್ಯಾಯ ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ. ಅದರ ದೀಪ ಇಸ್ ರೈಟ್. ಅವಳು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರೋ ಧ್ವನಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಪ್ರತಿಧ್ವನಿ ಆಗೋದೇ ಈ ಸಭೆಯ ಮೂಲ ಉದ್ದೇಶ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಕುವೆಂಪುರವರ ಒಂದು ಗೀತೆಯನ್ನು ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಡ್ತೇವೆ. ತರುಣರೇ ಎದ್ದೇಳಿ, ಎಚ್ಚರಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಏಳಿ, ಓ ಜನರೇ ಎದ್ದೇಳಿ, ಎಚ್ಚರಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಏಳಿ. ಹಳೆ ಮತದ ಕೊಳ್ಳೆಯಲ್ಲ ಹೊಸ ಮತಿಯ ಹೊಳೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಚ್ಚಿ ಹೋಗಲಿ ಬರಲಿ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಬುದ್ಧಿ, ಬರಲಿ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಬುದ್ಧಿ. ವೇದ ಪ್ರಮಾಣತೆಯ ಮರುಮರೀಚಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನೀರರಸಿ ಕೆಡದಿರಲಿ ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಸಿದ್ಧಿ, ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಸಿದ್ಧಿ. ಓ ಜನರೇ ಎದ್ದೇಳಿ, ಎಚ್ಚರಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಏಳಿ, ಓ ಜನರೇ ಎದ್ದೇಳಿ, ಎಚ್ಚರಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಏಳಿ. ಹೊಸ ಬಾಳ ಗೀತೆಯನ್ನು ದಿಕ್ಕು ದೆಸೆ ಬಿರಿವಂತೆ ಕೊರಳೆತ್ತಿ ಕೊರಳೆತ್ತಿ ಕೈ ಎತ್ತಿ ಕೈ ಎತ್ತಿ ದನಿ ಎತ್ತಿ ಹಾಡಿ, ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ದನಿ ಎತ್ತಿ ಹಾಡಿ. ಸೇರಿ ನಡೆದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ತಡೆಯುವವರು ಯಾರಿಲ್ಲ, ಸೇರಿ ನಡೆದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ತಡೆಯುವವರು ಯಾರಿಲ್ಲ. ಜಗವೇ ಹಿಂಜರಿಯುವುದು ನಿಡುದಾರಿ ನೀಡಿ, ನಮಗೆ ನಿಡುದಾರಿ ನೀಡಿ. ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಜನರೇ ಎದ್ದೇಳಿ, ಎಚ್ಚರಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಏಳಿ, ಓ ಜನರೇ ಎದ್ದೇಳಿ, ಎಚ್ಚರಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಏಳಿ. ಸಿಲುಕದಿರಿ ಮತವೆಂಬ ಮೋಹದ ಅಜ್ಞಾನಕ್ಕೆ, ಮತಿಯಿಂದ ದುಡಿಯಿರೈ ಲೋಕದ ಹಿತಕ್ಕೆ. ಆ ಮತದ ಈ ಮತದ ಹಳೆ ಮತದ ಸಹವಾಸ ಸಾಕಿನ್ನೂ ಸೇರಿರೈ ಮನುಜ ಮತಕ್ಕೆ. ಓ ಬನ್ನಿ ಸೋದರರೇ ವಿಶ್ವಪಥಕ್ಕೆ, ಮನುಜ ಮತಕ್ಕೆ ವಿಶ್ವಪಥಕ್ಕೆ, ಮನುಜ ಮತಕ್ಕೆ ವಿಶ್ವಪಥಕ್ಕೆ, ಮನುಜ ಮತಕ್ಕೆ ವಿಶ್ವಪಥಕ್ಕೆ.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಜನ್ನಿ ಸರ್ಗೆ. ಇದೀಗ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸವನ್ನು ನೀಡಲಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಅರುಂಧತಿ ರಾಯ್ ಅವರು ಈಗ ಕೆಲವು ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನು ಆಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಕೇಳ್ತೇನೆ. ಅವರು ಈಗ ತಮ್ಮ ಮಾತುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕಡಿಮೆಯನ್ನು ಮಾತಾಡಿ ನಂತರ ಸಂವಾದದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಸಮಯವನ್ನು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅನಂತರ ನಮ್ಮ ಒಂದು ತಾರೆಯಾದಂತಹ ಬಹುಭಾಷಾ ನಟರಾದಂತಹ ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್ ರೈ ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ಮಾತನಾಡಕ್ಕಿದ್ದಾರೆ. I welcome Arundhati Roy to speak.
It's my honor to be here with people who I so admire. 3 days ago, I buried my mother, and I didn't know whether my heart would allow me to leave her grave. But I'm here because she would be ashamed of me if I didn't come and speak for Gauri. Gauri was somebody who, every time I wrote something, she would call me with excitement. Arundhati, can I translate? Can I translate? I love you. This was our relationship. And today, Gauri is not here. Teesta just out of jail. And we know what has happened with Bilkis Bano. I was just trying to think, what is this trail? You know, what is the message that this government is trying to give us? In the recent weeks when Teesta was in jail, I was reading with very careful attention the legal documents that the Citizens for Justice and Peace have accumulated in the study of the Gujarat massacre. It is actually phenomenal work, you know, and I am one of those people who had little hope that in an institution functioning inside a fascist state would really give us justice. And I'm talking the coming of fascism since, you know, the late 90s, which some of us saw and were condemned for seeing, even by liberals. But the reason that the work of Teesta and her organization is so fantastic is because someday, honestly someday, this documentation, this volume of documentation, this meticulous kind of documentation should really provide evidence for war crimes, because that is what happened in Gujarat. I mean, we used to live in a country where if there was a railway accident, the railway minister would resign. Today we live in a country where people get electoral advantage from massacres, fresh massacres and old massacres. When the Gujarat massacre happened, when the Gujarat pogrom happened, we know the urgency with which the BJP and Narendra Modi were calling for elections. Why was that so? What was that urgency? When Bilkis saw her whole family murdered, she was gang raped, her daughter was killed by having her head smashed against a stone. The bodies of people who were killed were decapitated, they were hidden, there was collusion with the state machinery, there was collusion with doctors, there was collusion with so much of what ought to be the institutions that protect our democracy. But instead, just on the eve of an election, the rapists, the murderers were released. What is this message? Maybe they'll be put back, but the point is that the people who released them were released on a process, a legal process, which might have been misused, but no one has said anything about it. The central government ought to have approved. Maybe it did, maybe didn't, but it hasn't said it didn't. We know the people on the committee, many of them are members of the BJP, and we know that one of them said, it's impossible for these men to have committed those crimes because they were Brahmins, many of them. So what we are witnessing is an attempt for international reasons to erase the legal trail of the Gujarat pogrom, but for internal reasons to claim its political legacy. And this is very dangerous because it is being done for the people. So what we are seeing in India today is a fusion between the government, the state enforcement agencies, and a political party. They're all becoming one thing. They're all becoming inseparable from each other. When you have a political party that campaigns for Congress Mukt Bharat, what are they really saying? Given that that is the only national opposition party, they are saying we want a opposition-free democracy. Such a thing does not exist. You cannot have an opposition-free democracy. So it's very clear, the signaling of where we are heading, even while those of us who claim to be, many people who claim to be on the left, many people who are liberals have spent years discussing whether they are fascist or not. Whereas their ideologues are pretty clear about it. Their ideologues are pretty clear about what they want. So are we a democracy? I mean, the BJP has shown in the last 2 elections that it can win elections without the Muslim vote, which means, in effect, 200 million people have been disenfranchised, which means, and we see this every day, not just in the case of Bilkis Bano, but everywhere, that we have a constitution, we have some laws, but those laws, it depends on your caste, your religion, your gender. The laws will be applied depending on who you are. I mean, this has been the case for a long time, but now it's very, very clear. So how can a country that has disenfranchised 200 million people, that is working actively at wrecking the very system of government? We have elections, but the election machinery is wrecked. We have a party which is perhaps the richest political party in the world. That wealth came from demonetization, from opaque electoral bonds. And now the richest party in the world can topple governments, can buy members of parliament, members of the legislative assembly. So I have a suggestion for a new people's movement only for our elected representatives. They should campaign like the Kisan Andolan for a MSP for MLAs and MPs, a minimum support price. And perhaps they can, instead of going to these resorts and all, perhaps they can be stored in an Adani godown. And then they can auction themselves and they can demand at least a minimum rate, you know. Because how is it possible that we live in a country where people go out and vote for a person that represents a particular party, and day after tomorrow, that person doesn't represent that party, and that's legal? What kind of a system is this? You know, how is what is going on in this country counted as democracy? It's not a democracy anymore. And of course, it will take our liberals and our very sectarian intellectuals like 20 years more. Now they've just about managed to acknowledge beyond fascism. It'll take another 20 years to acknowledge that this isn't a democracy. I was scared of coming because, you know, my mind is full of heartbreak and full of grief for Gauri as well as for my mother. When I visited her grave this morning, I saw her mother at the grave and I thought, you know, Gauri, is this Gauri's grave or my mother's grave? But when I saw Gauri's mother at her grave, I thought, imagine what it would be like for my mother to be at my grave. And my mind was just, you know, so in a whirl. I was worried whether I would even say anything that makes sense today. But I just want to end by saying that look at uh, what has happened to us as people who think of ourselves as those in the resistance movement. I used to say, I mean, Deepu was talking about surveillance. I used to say that in the late 80s and early 90s, हमारे यहाँ तो दो ताला खोला था, एक मस्जिद का, बाबरी मस्जिद का, और एक बाजार का. Like they opened the locks of the market and of the Babri Masjid together. And when they opened those two locks, they unleashed two kinds of totalitarianism, two kinds of fundamentalism. One was religious Hindu fundamentalism, and the other was economic fundamentalism. And those two fundamentalisms led to two different reasons for the government to become increasingly a security state. You know, whether it was Islamic terrorism or whether it was anti-development, quote unquote, terrorism, Maoist protests, all of it, everything was an excuse for the state to securitize itself. And today we are in a situation, I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is it that has brought us to a situation where people who are oppressed, people who have no employment, people who are suffering deeply, are voting for further hellishness upon themselves? What has brought people to believe the reality of propaganda more than the reality that they experience every day in their own homes, in their own kitchens? What is it that makes people who have been oppressed by a caste system for centuries vote for those very people who uphold that system? After all, we know that, I mean, today Muslims are disenfranchised, but we come from a society that has dehumanized millions of people by calling them untouchables. And what is it about our imagination that is strengthening that very system now? This is a very, very serious question that we have to ask ourselves. Where did we go wrong? Because if you look at, I mean, this year is the 75th year of India's independence. In Delhi, the city was thick with flags. The saddest thing was that the poorest people, the beggars on the street, the homeless, the starving and the hungry were selling flags. And so the densest population of flags was where the people were the poorest. It was very ironical to just see as a vision, you know. And then I think that, you know, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, the revolutionary movements in our country, we were asking for revolution. They were asking for the redistribution of wealth, for the redistribution of land, for land to the tiller. Those movements were crushed. By the 90s, we came to anti-displacement. Whatever little we have, don't displace us. Don't take away whatever little we have. Those were crushed. By the 2000s, the radical demand was Manrega. You know, minimum wages for a few days, for a family enough, just about what a middle-class person might spend on a meal in a restaurant for the year, for the whole year. That was considered too radical. Now it's not even that. Now it's, हम आपको 5 किलो आटा और नमक और चीनी देंगे, फिर हम कहेंगे कि मोदी जी का नमक खाया तो आप हमें वोट दो. Now that has been withdrawn, and now we are fighting, people are fighting for their very citizenship. 2 million in Assam, literally on the verge of being stripped of citizenship. An occupation, a situation where so much of India is just a police state. I'm not even speaking of Kashmir. How can How can you suddenly shut down on a whim 7 million people and say you have no means of communication, no connection to the outside world for months together? Can you even imagine it? We can't leave our phones for 15 minutes. That was a war crime. So we are like a plane flying backwards. And today the truth is that we know, and people know, that whoever they vote for, they cannot be sure, even if the BJP loses, that it will not buy over the politicians that have been elected, because it has a lot of money to spend. So we are back where we were under colonialism, when there were no institutions. We have to fight on the street. And we have to start not even on the street, but below the street, because the street has now been poisoned. The street has now had its 24 hours a day toxic intravenous drip from not just the news channels, but every kind of signaling from television series, from films. And even Bollywood is being attacked and shut down because it's too cosmopolitan. So we have to start from sub-zero now. But that is a form of liberation, because we have to now not think of ourselves as defeated, but think of every small victory as a victory and move from there, because the system is broken and I do not think we can fix it. It will break and a new one will be born in its place. But this tyranny will end. It has to end. That is the law of physics. It will end. So let's not lose hope. Inqilab Zindabad.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ನಮ್ಮೊಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಆಗಲೇ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಗೌರಿ ಮೆಮೋರಿಯಲ್ ಟ್ರಸ್ಟ್ನ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರ ಸಂದೇಶವನ್ನು ಏನು ನೋಡಿದ್ವಿ, ಆ ಸಂದೇಶವನ್ನು ನಮಗೆ ಕಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ಟವರು ಕವಿತಾ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವರು. ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ತಿಳಿಸ್ತೀವಿ. ಆಗಲೇ ಅವರ ಅನುಪಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರಿದ್ವಿ. ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮೊಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಅವರು ದೆಹಲಿಯಿಂದ ನೇರವಾಗಿ ಬಂದು ಜಾಯ್ನ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರ್ತೇನೆ. ಇದೀಗ ಭಾಳ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಘಟ್ಟ, ಅರುಂಧತಿ ರಾಯ್ ಅವರ ಜೊತೆಗಿನ ಸಂವಾದ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ. ಈ ಸಂವಾದವನ್ನು ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ VS ಶ್ರೀಧರ್ ಅವರನ್ನು ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ. ಈ ಸಂವಾದದಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿ ಉಮಾಪತಿಯವರು ಹಿರಿಯ ಪತ್ರಕರ್ತರು, ಹಾಗೆ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ GN ಗಣೇಶ್ ದೇವಿಯವರು ಖ್ಯಾತ ಭಾಷಾ ತಜ್ಞರು, ಇವರು ಕೂಡ ಈ ಸಂವಾದ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ.
ಸಂಗಾತಿಗಳೇ, ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಅರುಂಧತಿಯವ್ರನ್ನ ಕರೆದಾಗ ಅವರು ನಾನು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಮಾತಾಡಲ್ಲ, ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಒಂದು ಸಂವಾದನ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಹೇಳಿದರು. ಆದರೆ ಸಂವಾದವನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ, ಅದನ್ನು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡೋದು ಅಗತ್ಯ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಮನವಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಆದರೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಅವರು ಬಹುಶಃ ಇಲ್ಲಿಯ ಒಂದು ವಾತಾವರಣ ನೋಡಿ ಒಂದು ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಭಾಷಣವನ್ನೇ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಆದರೂ ನಾವು ಸಂವಾದವನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ. ಮೊದಲಿಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಅದು ಫೋಕಸ್ಡ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್ ಆಗಲಿ ಅನ್ನೋ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ದೇವಿ ಮತ್ತು ಉಮಾಪತಿಯವರ ಜೊತೆ ಒಂದು ಸಂವಾದ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಇದು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೆಯುತ್ತೆ, ಬಟ್ ಅದರ ಅನುವಾದ ಸೈಮಲ್ಟೇನಿಯಸ್ ಆಗಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಅದನ್ನು ನೀವು ಫಾಲೋ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. That we will continue with this kind of dialogue which you preferred when you said that you wanted to be with us for this function. So we will have about 25 to 30 minutes of this, including some questions from the audience, and then go on with it. Yeah, and then we'll have Prakash talking to us and then wind up. So we have two eminent panelists, one Dr. Devi, who is a member of our trust, and more than that, a very well-known linguist. Now he has become a part of Karnataka, been with us in all our struggles. So I would invite him for this panel discussion on all of us, on behalf of all of us. And we have Umapati, a very senior journalist, and has been writing, and he is a consultant editor for Nyayapatha, a tabloid which we are bringing out as a continuation of what Gauri used to be. So I will hand over this mic to Umapati first, I think. So I would like request you to take turns and then conduct this series.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಇದು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ, ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಟ್ರೈ ಟು ಸ್ಪೀಕ್ ಇನ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್. ಐ won't be apologetic about my English because all through I have written in Kannada. I'm sorry if I sound defiant and rude. There are many competent and deserving persons to do this job, but I have been ordained to carry out this task. I deem it an honor to sit next to such eminent people and going to cherish these moments throughout my life. Will be too happy and feel contented and relieved to play a second fiddle to Ganesh Devi sir. Our deepest, on behalf of you and people of Karnataka, I express our deepest condolences to Miss Mary Roy, mother of Arundhati Raji, and I request her to, could you tell us more about your mother, ma'am? Your mother as an activist and a humanist.
Thank you for asking me that. My mother, can you hear me? Shout, sound. Hello. Is it better?
Hello. Hello.
Hello?
Working, but it's not carrying this. It's working. It's like the government. It's working, but it doesn't carry or capture voice.
Sure.
Thank you for asking me about my mother. She was, I think, I would say she was not one of the, but the most extraordinary she that I knew. And this is not because she was a great mother. I quite, while the daughter in me had had a lot of conflict with her. I literally left home when I was 16 because I couldn't take it. But the writer in me admired her immensely, even for being such a tough and unmotherly mother. But the real reason that I admired her was, she belonged to the Syrian Christian community. She married my father, who was Bengali. She was divorced when I was very, very young, maybe 2 or 3 years old, and she left. She came back to a very parochial, closed, elite community she was, in effect removed from the church and so on. But she then stayed there, and she started a school which is today one of the most wonderful schools in India. And when she came back from after leaving my father, who I had never seen, the first time I met him I was in my 20s, she realized that among the Syrian Christians, the inheritance law said that a woman can inherit 1/4 of her father's property or 5,000 rupees, whichever is less. So she challenged the Syrian Christian inheritance law and won, and it was changed, struck down with retrospective effect. So essentially women won equal rights. But as we all know, in our country, changing the law is not enough because society continues with its ways. But the reason I consider her extraordinary is because as a woman, I have seen few women who give themselves permission to use the full spectrum of everything they are. Her craziness, her cruelty, her rage, her brilliance, her love, her understanding of education. She was just, when people were speaking about her at her funeral, I said, someday I will turn into a stand-up comic and I will make you laugh for 24 hours at a stretch, telling you stories about her. So that was the kind of woman she was. The two of us, I kept saying we were like two nuclear powers, we could not be trusted to be in the same space for too long, but we honored each other and we loved each other deeply, and I will celebrate my mother to the end of my days as somebody who gave me permission in some strange, sometimes kind and sometimes cruel way, but she gave me permission to be everything that I wanted to be, anything that I wanted to be, and to be the cat that walks alone. I'll just tell you one story. When I just started thinking about it after she died, actually, that when she left my father and we were living in great poverty, actually, in Uti, and I was being taught by an Australian missionary teacher in a school. I was 5 years old, and for some reason this missionary teacher would tell me every day almost, I can see Satan in your eyes. Maybe she was right, but anyway, the very first sentence that I wrote, and now I'm thinking, how did I write that? Because somebody told me, gave me a pencil and a piece of paper, and I still have that book, and that somebody must have been my mother, and said, write what you feel. And the first sentence I wrote was, I hate Miss Mitten and I think her knickers are torn. So from then, the woman that gave me the freedom to write was she, and that freedom is the greatest gift that anyone could ever have given me. That was my mother.
It will be very brief, so
Okay.
thank you. Well, it works now? Can you hear?
No.
Thank you, thank you. Very moving. I want to ask you about the other mother. We normally say mother tongue, but I'll not get into linguistic chauvinism. I know that you live in a world of Bangla, Malayalam, Hindi, English, and so many other languages. I have been fortunate in being Gujarati, Marathi, Kannada, English. You mentioned that people's demand should be minimum selling price for the people's representatives.
Not people's demand,
No, their demand. I am thinking of MSP differently. Minimum speech permission. We have now come to a time when we have minimum speech permission. We have all forgotten words. And if words come to us, meanings are forgotten. For instance, I don't recall meaning of democracy at all. And what is the meaning of federalism, etc., etc. Imagine the reality that we have today per person in India some minimum speech permission, which means about 50 crores can use 1 or 2 words. Remaining 50 crores can use maybe 2-3 words. Remaining 50 crores use other words which nobody is listening to. Now comes your turn. You have permission in the present, and I'm not fictionalizing. I'm actually talking of you have permission to, and you know how dear word is to you, and word is dear to me. You have permission only to speak 2 or 3 words on your life for India.
On my life.
On my life.
No,
on everybody's. What would be those 2 or 3 words for which India should live? And then once you give those words, I'll ask you the question.
Well, the first 2 would be equality and justice. To me, the third would be beauty.
Thank you. The beauty of Tista's documentation of the Gujarat riots. Beauty of a cartoonist's courage to face prison. Beauty of a great public intellectual like you to speak up when all others are scared. What is the source of that beauty and how that source can be awakened today? And there my question ends. Yet said a terrible beauty is born.
I want to read something, if I can find it.
Please, she wants to read something. So, what is the source of, Tista, Gauri, and Arundhati, what is the source of that courage, that beauty?
When as a writer, the first thing that I'm alert to in our country is when language changes. And I'm not talking about Hindi, English, Malayalam. I'm not talking about that language. I'm talking about when what is acceptable to be said changes. And to me, that change I sensed deeply when the nuclear tests happened. I sensed that suddenly people were saying things which previously could not be said, you know, and the language of an ugly kind of nationalism, not the love of one's country, but the hate of other countries, or the hate of somebody in your country that constitutes a way of being national. So I wrote an essay called The End of Imagination. And in that essay, I talked about a conversation that I had with a friend, you know, who was asking me, you know, when I told her that the only dream worth having is to live while you're alive and die only when you're dead. And so she said, which means exactly what? And I said, I'm a writer, so I had to write down on a piece of paper. And this is what I wrote. And this is my manifesto. To love, to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance, to never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you, to seek joy in the saddest places, to pursue beauty to its lair, to never simplify what is complicated or complicate what is simple, to respect strength, never power, above all to watch, to try and understand, to never look away, and never to forget.
Thank you. Very beautiful. Thank you. Your time.
As one who has followed you in most of your interviews, you have been sounding consistently optimist and been saying that people will fight back. But each time state has come back with an iron hand and put it down. What is the basis you say this, what's the basis of your optimism in people, man?
Actually, that's a very good question, you know, because one of my books is dedicated to those who have learned to divorce hope from reason, you know, because hope is almost something in one's DNA, you know. And when I look at our country, honestly, I really feel truthfully that our problem is not the state. Our problem is society. Our problem is a society that practices caste. Our problem is our society that practices hierarchical thinking, and this is not hierarchical only from those at the top, even from those at the bottom. You know, there is no lateral thinking. There's no solidarity. Everything is about vertical thinking. And that, like I think I said in one of my essays, you know, that if Mao said that a single spark can light a prairie fire, in our country there's no prairie, there's just a maze of, you know, caste and community and religion and identity, and that poor little single spark is just lost trying to find its way out of the maze. But when I look at what other countries in the world have endured, when I look at what happened in Europe during the Second World War, when I look at what happened in Russia during the war, the millions who lost their lives, the people in the Gulag, the Stasi in East Germany, the destruction of the whole of Japan, bombed to non-existence. And even today, the Americans say that the reason we bombed Hiroshima was to actually save lives because the Japanese were not willing to surrender. When you look at the millions and millions of people that were murdered in Europe in the Second World War, in the First World War, when you look at the genocide against Native Indians, when you look at what happened to African Americans, and look at the fight back now. We haven't even begun to know what war is. We haven't begun to understand what true suffering and fighting is. You know, people who have risen from the rubble to build themselves. I mean, what right do we have to feel depressed and finished? Because we had 7 years of BJP? Really? Come on.
But the dark age seems to continue, and there seems to be no expiry date to it.
But that depends on your scale of thinking, you know, in what cycles are we thinking, you know. We cannot, I mean, if you look at it from the right-wing point of view, the RSS has been working for 100 years to get here. You know, are we doing that work? We can't do that kind of work, because I feel that only when you have an ideology that is fueled by this kind of monochromatic, monovision hatred, can you work that hard, ideologically driven? You know, so that is a knife, and we are an ocean, you know, and we believe in being an ocean. And we believe that, I believe that our job is to prevent the circle from closing. Certainly, I am one person who believes that nothing in the world can ever be dominated by one religion, one ideology, one sort of point of view. But while we look at that kind of diversity and make room for it, there are some things that we absolutely cannot accept. One of those things is the idea of India as a Hindu nation and everyone else as second-class citizens. Another one is the march of capitalism, which now you see is going to end the planet. One of the most heartbreaking moments in my recent days was I was having dinner with a lot of friends. Many of them were Muslim. And one person said to me, Arundhati, don't you think that if we just accept to be second-class citizens, if we just accept that we shouldn't have a vote, that I shouldn't have a vote because I'm Christian, you shouldn't have a vote, I'm not Christian, I mean my mother's a Christian. So supposing we just agree to this position, then do you think the violence will stop? I said, no, it won't stop till you're crushed, till you're powder. So you better stand up, you know, because right now the situation is that a climate has been created in this country where the future of this country can be decided by any crazy extremist, either a real attack or a false flag attack or anything, you know. We have just given ourselves over to this spectacle-driven election voting and so on. If things go badly, of course, we'll have another, big attack, and we won't know who did it. It could be real, it could be not. So we are going through a tidal situation, and sometimes all we can do is to keep our tent pegs, to keep standing and live to fight another day, you know. But we can't let ourselves lie down and say everything is dark because there's been a horror show for 7 years. Because we also know that this horror show did not start with the BJP, you know. We know that this horror show started even before India became a nation. This horror show started when in The God of Small Things, the first chapter ends when the love laws were made, the laws that lay down who should be loved and how much. This is a terrible society, and we have to change. It's not just that protesters and movements and people's movements have to change. We have to change in our personal lives. Who do we love? Who do we invite to our table? Who are our friends? What do we value? We can't all say these things and then go back and do the same rituals and the same marriages and the same caste and the same nonsense that we do all the time. Let me tell you that my mother was not given a place in a graveyard because of what she did. We had to invent our funeral rites, which are not over. I will go back tomorrow and I will immerse part of her ashes in the river I grew up on. But I'm proud of it. I'm proud that we did not find a place in a space which is casteist, even though it's Christian. I'm proud of these things. So each of us has plenty of fighting to do, even in our personal lives. We can't be just like expect Gauri and Teesta and Arundhati and Prakash Rai to do these things. We have to do it in our own lives too, and we have to start now.
I was supposed to ask a question, one more question, which I shall not, because Arundhati said everything that we need to hear, remember and carry in our hearts and in our action. So I will not even say thank you. I will say thank you to you the day India recovers its democracy and when the South recovers its dignity and opposes the imposition of the North on the South. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it audible? No, this is better, I think. So now we can take questions from the audience for some time. And those who would like to ask the question, I think that's working, that will come around. But if you can raise your voice, we are still audible. ಸೊ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳಿದ್ದರೆ ಕೇಳಿ, ನೀವು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೇಳ್ಬೋದು, ಅದು ನಾವು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ರವಾನಿಸ್ಬೋದು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊದಲನೇ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ, ಸಮ್ ಕ್ವೆಶನ್ ಹಸ್ ಕಮ್ ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ. ಸೊ ದಿ ಕ್ವೆಶನ್ ಈಸ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್, so you did talk about two terms, dear, equality and liberty. Can that be possible without the annihilation of caste, is the question. The question is, can there be equality and liberty without annihilation of caste? There's a continuous problem with that. Hello? Maybe you have to come here. We'll forget it, we'll carry on. Hello?
It cannot. The worst problem that we have in our society is caste. It is practiced by Christians, it is practiced by Sikhs, it is practiced by Muslims, and of course it is the fundamental building block of Hindu society. So it cannot, and it is the saddest and most shameful thing about us. We can stop blaming BJP, RSS and everything if we understand that, that after all, when you look at, somebody just got me to sign this little book I wrote called The Doctor and the Saint, but if you look at even capitalism today, you look at who are the big corporations, Reliance, Mittal, Adani, it all comes from a certain caste. It is caste and capitalism that has made a peculiar alchemy in our country today. Caste has modernized. Caste has become part of corporatism. If you look at who owns the newspapers, who are the editors, who are the journalists, look at it through a prism of caste, then we will all stop feeling so virtuous. the whole thing is that there's so much rhetoric and there's so little that actually moves on the ground. I mean, we have less than 3% or 4% of our population that marries outside of their caste, you know. And I mean, what does it mean when you have the whole world and India moved by a movement that called itself Me Too? And we have Bilkis Bano, and what has happened to her? Where is everybody? Why aren't we absolutely outraged by this? I learned as a writer after the Gujarat pogrom, it's not enough to describe horror, because I have described it. I have described it in detail, and I have had people turn to me and say, so what? You know, it is important for us within our, you know, even to understand, for example, when we are looking at an organization like the RSS, which understands caste much better than even some of the parties that said that they were fighting against caste in UP and Bihar. But they were not fighting against caste, they were fighting for the upliftment of their caste, which is great, which is good. But that allowed a space for the RSS to move in and turn the most oppressed people against each other. You know, that is the danger of the society that we are in. We are up against a very clever foe that understands this society very, very deeply, more deeply than the Congress party, which claimed to be a secular party but was entirely organized by dominant caste people. Didn't even begin to understand what's going on the ground, you know. So no, we cannot have any form of equality without the annihilation of caste. And the annihilation of caste is not merely up to the state, it is up to society. Thank you.
So, one thing, actually we will take the questions, but questions have to be very short and crisp, because all of us want to say a lot of things, what we think, but we don't have time for it. So, I actually expect all of you to raise questions in a very short manner.
In a precise way.
Very precise. Yeah, it will come. And we'll be taking only maximum six questions.
Where does the beginning?
Yeah.
No, we'll come there, 1 second. We'll begin here.
And 4, 5.
So we'll come there 1 second. We'll begin with this and come there.
ಸರ್ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೇ ಕೇಳ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀನಿ.
ಕೇಳಿ ಸರ್.
ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ರೀಧರ್ ಸರ್ ನೀವೇ ಅವರಿಗೆ
ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಒಂದು ನಿಮಿಷ, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳೋಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಂಚೆ BF 4856 ಈ ವೆಹಿಕಲ್ ಏನೋ ತುಂಬ ಅಡ್ಡಾಗ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಯಾರು ಇದ್ದರೆ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಅಂತ ತೆಗಿಬೇಕು. 4856
TN02 BF 4856 ಕಾರ್ ಯಾರ್ದಿದೆ ಚೂರು ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಅರ್ಜೆಂಟ್ ಇದೆ.
ಕೇಳಿ, ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿ
ಸರ್, ಅರುಂಧತಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಜನಪರ ಸಶಸ್ತ್ರ ಹೋರಾಟಗಳು ನೆಲ ಕಚ್ಚಿದ್ವ ಅಥವಾ ಎಡಪಕ್ಷಗಳು CPI ಇರ್ಬೋದು, CPM ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಅನೇಕ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಸ್ಟಿನ ಹೆಸರುಗಳಲ್ಲಿರುವಂತ ಪಕ್ಷಗಳು ನೇಪಥ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸರಿಯೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಬಿಜೆಪಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಇಡೀ ಭಾರತ ದೇಶಾದ್ಯಂತ ತನ್ನ ದಬ್ಬಾಳಿಕೆಯನ್ನ ಮತ್ತು ಕಾಲಿಟ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಅದು ಅಧಿಕಾರವನ್ನ ಆಕ್ರಮಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳೋದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಆ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಎಡಪಕ್ಷಗಳ ಮತ್ತು ಎಡಚಿಂತನೆಗಳ ಹೋರಾಟಗಳು ನೆಲಕಚ್ಚಿರೋ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಬಿಜೆಪಿ ಮೆರೀತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ ಅಂತ ತಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ.
So the question is
party also, and as I said, I think it's the failure of our society, but we have to understand. I mean, today I see a lot of young people raising the slogan of Jai Bhim and Inqilab Zindabad, and until we understand the connection between capitalism and caste, we will not move forward. We'll keep treading water, you know. And the point about the armed struggle is, I always maintain that, you know, we need a biodiversity of resistance. And today we know under what kinds of condition. I've spent weeks inside Bastar and written a little book called Walking with the Comrades. And I have been questioned about that. The point is that inside the forest, 4 days walk from the road, when you have paramilitary and you have vigilante groups like Salva Jurum burning, raping, killing, forcing Adivasis to move, to live in the forests, not able to come out and sleep in their villages for fear of what is going to happen. And on the TV studios, everyone wants them to be Gandhian. And I said, but first of all, they can't go on a hunger strike because they're already starving. They can't boycott foreign goods because they don't have any goods. And last of all, you need a theater. You need a theater, you need an audience to be a Gandhian. You can't do it away from nowhere in the middle of the forest, you know. So what form a struggle takes to me is not always just ideologically dictated. It is tactics, you know. And so I don't blame just the left, although I think the inability of the left to understand caste is a huge problem, because then you are actually forsaking your actual constituency. I mean, I know that things have slowly started to change, but when I wrote, I know it hasn't been translated into Kannada, but when I wrote The God of Small Things, it was all about the failure of the left. I mean, it was not all about, but substantially about the failure of the left to understand caste, to distance itself from caste. And what happened in the end was that, there was a huge outcry against me by the mainstream left. And there was a case against me for corrupting public morality, because the book ends with the physical and beautiful love between a Syrian Christian woman and a person from the Dalit community. And this was, the outrage was disguised as something else. But this was the outrage. How can this happen? How can you talk? How can you break the love laws? But the whole book was about transgression of every kind. And this transgression is very important in our society, you know. So to answer your question, I think that the caste system, just like colonialism, how many soldiers, British soldiers were there in India to rule this great subcontinent? Not many. Everyone collaborated. Just like that, for thousands of years, a very small minority of Brahmins, Baniyas, upper caste people have found such incredibly clever ways to continue their domination. It may look secular, it may look left, it may look corporate, it may look capital, but ultimately it's the same folks doing the same thing, you know. So we have to see through that.
Madam, you spoke about caste.
Where is that coming from? One second, come there. There is that lady there in the black shirt. Yes, please. Sir, I'll come back. Who?
Madam, you spoke about caste discrimination. I have been observing genetic discrimination between the Eurasian Aryan and the Dravidian aborigines of India, and also the European, the Bill Gates mafia, which is trying to destroy the aborigines across the world through the COVID, and also the weather warfare through the satellites causing floods and famines. I have a solution for this, what is called supremacy psychosis of these races. First is counseling, second is medication, third is electroconvulsive therapy, and fourth is psychosurgery. I'm a neurosurgeon, so what is your opinion on that? Thank you, man.
But you seem to have the solution already with you. Want to that?
No, you have a solution.
He has a solution already. No, please. Yes. So, one nimsha, hinge bartidini, one nimsha. No, there was this lady here who. Okay, we'll come back after this. See, there is that lady trying to ask. Okay, next is that. What happened? Oh, you are here. Okay.
Since the elections are being held democratically as we all see, the present system is, as per the data, out of 140 crore of the Indian population, the voters are around 90 crore only. Out of that, only 60% go for voting. Out of poll votes, a 40%, between 30 and 40%, whichever party gets will come to rule. That means around 20 to 23 crore people, if they are convinced by a hate monger group, I know it's very much possible for them to go with a good majority. Since they only have a lot of money with them,
But what is the question, please? Make it into a question.
they know how to handle 23 crore. Even if the other 80 crore or 100 crore people are peace-loving, are struggling for the development of the country, it is very difficult for this 100 crore to handle that mafia, which is able to arm twist 23 crore voters with their lot of money and other agenda of hate mongering. Can you please throw light on how we, the people who are peace-loving, should handle this kind of situation? Thank you.
Before Arundhati starts, I'll actually request you to be short and crisp, so that we have more time for more questions.
Very important.
Yeah. No, we'll take it now. Please, you can answer.
Sometimes when I'm listening to these questions, I just keep wishing my work was translated into Kannada, because I have written about all these things quite extensively. And the fact is that I keep saying this fire in the ducts, the system is gamed now. The system is rigged. I don't mean just by EVMs and all that, but we do have a first past the post system where a very small minority of the population can result in a huge majority of the seats, and the mathematical calculations of that mean that we are in a very serious problem here. And then we have the absolutely serious problem of the corporate media, which has a conflict of interest. It is what it is. The corporate media, where either it's directly owned by companies that are mining, that are privatizing, that are doing everything possible to control the economy, and the capital is going into fewer hands, and the messaging is in very few hands. So the thing is that all our energies need to be put into raising these questions, more than just all our energy going into campaigning for an already rigged and skewed election. Now when we come to 2025 or 26, I think, when delimitation happens, the skewed relationship with the North and South is going to change even more. You have a situation where states like UP, if you look at a map, I was just looking at a map of government, based on government figures, the poorest areas in the country are in the Gangetic Plain, currently mostly ruled by the BJP. Poorest. And the district that I come from, Kottayam, for example, the first district to be 100% literate, the only district in India to have 0% poverty. You look at Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, I think, Andhra, people who have population reduction, people whose progressive politics are making things better, are then going to suffer because they'll have fewer seats, and the North will have more seats, and therefore fewer and fewer regional geographic regions will decide who will rule this country. This is going to create a very serious problem in the future. So we need to think about where to direct our energies. Otherwise, it's like putting water into a bucket that's leaking. It's never going to fill. unless we understand these structural things.
Now, one second, please. After this, okay, sorry. Hello. Excuse me.
Hello.
You wanted to ask? Please go ahead. After this lady asks her question. Wait a minute. We will take some of the questions together and then we will give it to her in brief. So please ask your question.
My question is to Arunti ma'am. Ma'am, I love you.
Is there a question?
Ma'am, my question is that just like right now you talked about transgression, personal transgression, right? On an individual. So in your book, the word is called.
Please come over and.
So come out to the diet.
Kudiya for. It's not good. Some terrible problem.
Give her the mic, no?
Why don't you come here and.
ಹಲೋ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಮೈಕನ್ನು ಆಫ್ ಮಾಡಿ. ಅದು ಯಾವ ಮೈಕು ಬೇಡ, ಇದೇ ಇರಲಿ ಸಾಕು.
Okay, so in your book, like The God is Small Things, there are characters who exhibit significant, like considerable, enormous transgression against the larger system, against the big things, right? So, like even now you were talking about personal transgressions. So, I mean, my question is that those who show the most amount of courage are the ones who have to suffer the most. For instance, like even Gauri Lankesh. So the people who take the most initiative are the ones who have to bear the cumulative burden of the larger things. So, like, why should a person do that?
Can you take some more questions?
I think we can take a few questions together.
We will take 2-3 questions. There's a problem with the time. Okay, please understand, because all of us have questions. There are 500 people, 500 questions. So please, let's actually take 2-3 questions. And we have Prakash here, and I am actually not only me, all of you are waiting for him to speak. Okay.
ಮತ್ತೆ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ನಿಮಿಷ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಯಾರಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳಿದ್ದಾವೆ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ಸ್ಲಿಪ್ಪಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೆದು ಕಳಿಸಿ. ಆ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಅವರಿಗೆ ತಿಳಿಸಿ ಅವರಿಂದ ಉತ್ತರ ಪಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡೋಣ.
Hello ma'am, so my question basically is regarding the freedom of speech in India. Recently we see that The Wire made an elaborative analysis about the Twitter accounts handled by the BJP IT cell. In a country like India, where censorship is not only limited to print and electronic media but social media, how do you get through with the people who can't even understand the pace at which their freedom of speech is getting curbed in this country?
Two more questions, but keep it very brief.
Madam, today 80% of the people who are voting for the BJP are actually the beneficiaries be the previous governments. It could be the reservations or it could be anything. Though you are telling that the liberalization will take place or the things will not stick to the point which it is currently, on what confidence level you tell that this is going to happen? Point number one. And point number two, personally I feel the collective, it could be the Supreme Court or it could be independent bodies or it could be other media, it could be all ED, CBI and everything. Is collective, is opposition is what I feel, not any one political party. And everyone are only blaming at one person who is actually fighting against the fascist mindset today. What is your opinion about it? It's the two questions.
Harsha, please. And
I'll give it to Harsha. You can ask.
Thanks for the opportunity. Ma'am, when you wrote the a book-length introduction to Annihilation of Caste, titled The Doctor and the Saint, you are also criticized severely by Ambedkarites. There was also a book titled, what is that? It was a very strong criticism. As I understand, the criticism was that why a upper caste person write a so long introduction to Ambedkar. So I want your response.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am.
This is the last question.
The ruling party seems to have inherited the British legacy of divide and rule, and the electoral system is enabling them to do that. The opposition parties, finding themselves deeply fragmented, when will they realize, despite being disparate, that they have to come together to fight this evil?
Okay, we are finishing the questions. Please. We are finishing. Actually, we don't have time. Personally, sorry for it.
We have
Yeah.
ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರೆ, ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಹಲವಾರು ಜನಗೆ ಹಲವು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ಇದೆ. ಸಹಜವಾಗಿಯೇ ನೀವು ಅಪಾರ್ಥ ಭಾವಿಸಬೇಡಿ. ಗಂಟೆ 7:30 ಆಗಿದೆ. ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್ ರೈ ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ಮಾತಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕಿದೆ. ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಚೀಟಿಯನ್ನು ಕೊಡಲಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಎಲ್ಲ ನಿಮಗೆ ಇರೋ ಅಭಿಪ್ರಾಯಗಳನ್ನು, ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಚೀಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೆದು ಕಳಿಸ್ಬೇಕು. ಮತ್ತು ಮಳೆ ಬರೋ ರೀತಿಯೂ ಇದೆ. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೂಡ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಸಹಕಾರ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಇದ್ದಾಗಲೇ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ಅಚ್ಚುಕಟ್ಟಾಗಿ ಮುಗಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ವಿನಯಪೂರ್ವಕವಾಗಿ ಗೌರಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಪರವಾಗಿ ನಿಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ.
So the answer to the first question about the fact that people who show the most courage pay the greatest price, that's almost like the law of physics, you know. So the people who show the greatest courage are the ones who have the greatest desire to change our society, and obviously the ones that therefore take the greatest risk. The second question about freedom of speech. You see, this is a really huge question about how how freedom of speech is being shut down. Again, censorship comes, and in the world today, the censorship comes from the state, it comes from the corporations that own the social media, and it comes from society itself, where we have now both progressives, revolutionaries, rightists, leftists, statists, feminists, castists, anti-castists. Everyone is trying to shut down everybody else. And this is a situation that is so terribly dangerous because we are creating a sort of street with tripwires. You know, nobody can walk, nobody can speak, nobody can think, and nobody's thinking twice about trying to shut another person down. Sometimes not based on what they're saying, but based on who they are. So it isn't this is not a question that I can answer because none of us have an answer to it, and all of us are struggling to keep spaces open where things can be said. And what are, I mean, today we should mention, definitely we should mention the fact that I'm actually so happy to be here speaking at the memorial of Gauri, who was shot down for what she said. But only a few weeks ago, another writer, Salman Rushdie, was nearly assassinated. And only a few miles away from here, there were people chanting, Sar se tan juda. Everyone is trying to shut down everyone. The point is there isn't a single religion that does not criticize another religion. That's fine, but we all have to live together. We find ways of living together. And if we're going to kill everyone that we disagree with, there's going to be no space for disagreement, just space for assassination either physically or of character or of ideas or of the mind. So this, when Salman Rushdie was attacked, you had all the major, presidents and prime ministers in the Western world rushing to say that his fight is our fight. But when they bombed and destroyed all of Japan, when they bombed Afghanistan, when they bombed Iraq, how many writers did they silence? How many writers did they kill? How many musicians did they shut down? Does that not count at all for them? You have Julian Assange, a brilliant man, in jail, literally dying in jail. You have Edward Snowden, who I met in Moscow, not allowed to speak. He was only speaking the truth, as was Julian Assange. So nobody has free speech. Some people pretend to have free speech. The next question about, the fact that this system is gamed, that, for example, the people who are voting for the BJP are the same people who benefited from reservation, who benefited from policies of the previous government. In fact, first of all, we must understand that we should be very careful of reducing the whole debate about caste oppression only to reservation, because very few people, and reservation is very important because those few people who benefit from it begin to be able to have a voice, but very few people benefit from it. The rest of caste oppression continues. So that's not the only issue against caste, but even the previous government, when they started to privatize, education, and that is going at speed now, it appears to be a benign act, but it is pushing OBCs, Dalits, and Muslims who are now pushed down the economic ladder out of educational institutions. The only reason I say I have hope is because I hope that these, who are the majority of this population, will understand what's being done to them. That's where my hope comes from. Not just in the air, but people must surely be understanding what is being done to them. They must surely see that whatever little space was opened up has been taken away and is being taken away at speed. And when that majority understands that they are being pitted against each other only in order, the last question talked about divide and rule. Do you think the British invented divide and rule? No. Caste is divide and rule, So that is there. And the question regarding the criticism of me, yes, there was bitter criticism when I wrote the introduction to Annihilation of Caste. I can understand that criticism given, the society that we come from. The reason I did it was because Annihilation of Caste was actually a speech written to be delivered to a dominant caste audience. And I think in our society, while the Annihilation of Caste is widely read, it's one of the best-selling texts in this country, but deliberately avoided, again, by the dominant castes. And by writing this, I hoped it would breach that and move into a space which didn't want to read it. But because of the criticism, I actually separated it, and now it comes out as a little book of its own. And I hope that allays at least some of the anger against me, because I still stand by that text. Thank you. So this is the last question. You've spoken about capitalism and caste. When do we seek or dream of women's liberation? World over, it seems men are fighting each other while women and girls seem to be waiting for permission to be fully human. Look, if we are waiting, it's our problem. We don't wait. My mother didn't wait. I didn't wait. None of the characters in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness waited. None of the characters in the God of Small Things waited. Today, I will say that some of the most magnificent people in the world are women, and also the people who murder their babies because they are girls in this country. We live in many centuries simultaneously, but I think and I feel now that, we can't keep on talking about being oppressed. No one else is going to fight that fight for us, Something wrong when you say we've been oppressed for thousands of years. We've got to stand up. We've got to fight. And fighting means, let me tell you, the most wonderful thing is to be a free woman. If I actually rushed down for my mother's, because my mother passed away, but if I had come here directly, you know what I would have been wearing? I would have been wearing a t-shirt which said, Akeli, Awara, Azad. And my mother was Akeli and Azad. I added the Awara to it. And we can add a lot more, because what we are fighting for eventually is to be happy, to be allowed to be the full range of who we are. And that's what I started with. My mother showed me that. We don't have to be nice people. We don't have to be good wives and good daughters and good mothers. I loved my mother because she was a badass mother, Thank you.
So I think that brings us to the close of the dialogue session. So thank you very much for taking all the questions, and thanks, sir, Professor Devi and Umapati. I'm sure that I'm aware that there were a lot more questions, and those who wanted to ask that might be disappointed. But there is a constraint in such formal functions of time and other things. So we will resume. So we'll resume the program, the concluding session, and I request our anchor to continue with this.
ಸಂವಾದ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ನಡೆಸಿಕೊಟ್ಟಂಥ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ವಿ.ಎಸ್. ಶ್ರೀಧರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು, ಹಾಗೂ ಪ್ಯಾನಲ್ನಲ್ಲಿದ್ದಂಥ ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ಇದೀಗ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೂಡ ಕಾತರದಿಂದ ಕಾಯ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ನಮ್ಮ ನೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಬಹುಭಾಷಾ ನಟರಾದಂಥ ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್ ರೈ ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ವೇದಿಕೆಗೆ ಬರಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಕವಿತಾ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ವೇದಿಕೆಗೆ ಬರಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಮನವಿ ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಇದೀಗ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ಅಂತಿಮ ಘಟ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಗೌರಿ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಅವರ ಗೌರಿ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಅವರ ಸಹೋದರಿಯಾದಂಥ ಕವಿತಾ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಅವರು ಕೆಲವು ಮಾತನ್ನು ಆಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಕೇಳ್ತೇನೆ.
ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ
ಹಲೋ 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 ಹಲೋ
ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಮೊನ್ನೆ ಈ ಸಭಾಂಗಣ ಬುಕ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೆ ನಾನು. ಆವಾಗ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಹುಷಾರು ನೋಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾಡು, ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ಯಾವುದೋ ಮೊನ್ನೆ ರಾಜಕೀಯದೊಂದು ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ನಡೀತು, 50 ಜನನೂ ಬಂದಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರು. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ತುಂಬಿದೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಐ ಆಮ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪಿ. ಖುಷಿಯಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಗೌರಿ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಅಸಲಿ ಗೌರಿ ಅಂತ ಆಲೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡೋರು ಇನ್ನೂ ತುಂಬ ಜನ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಒಂದೆಲ್ಲ ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ನಿರೀಕ್ಷೆ ಹುಟ್ಟಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಇವತ್ತಿಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರೋಂಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು ಗೌರಿ ಹೋಗಿ. ಈ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ 5 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಇನ್ನೂ ಹೋಗಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅವಳು. ಬಿಕಾರ ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಆಗೋಯ್ತು ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸತಿ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಇನ್ನೂ ನೆನ್ನೆ ನಡೆದಂಗೆ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ತುಂಬಾ ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು ಅವಳು ನೋಡಿ, ಅವಳ ಜೊತೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಬಟ್ ಪ್ರತಿ ಸತಿ ಈ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಫಂಕ್ಷನ್ ಆದಾಗ ಎಲ್ಲೋ ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಪ್ರೊಟೆಸ್ಟಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಕರೀತಾ ನಾನು ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗಿ ಹೋಗಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದೊಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಹೋಗ್ತೀನಿ. ಹೋದಾಗೆಲ್ಲ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆ ನಾವು ಕೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ಈ ವಾತಾವರಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ರಾಜಕೀಯ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಏನು ಹೇಳಿರೋರು ಅವನು, ಅದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಾನು ಗೌರಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ಅವಳು ಏನು ಹೇಳಿರೋಳು ಅಂತ ತುಂಬ ಕಾಡುತ್ತೆ ಅವಳು. ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗಂತೂ ಎಷ್ಟು ಬೇಸತ್ತಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ನಾನು ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ನೋಡಿ 2 ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು ಟೆಲಿವಿಷನ್ ಹಾಕಿ ನೋಡಲ್ಲ, ಆದರೂ ಪೇಪರ್ ಓದಬೇಕು ಅಥವಾ ಒಂದು ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟಲ್ಲಿ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ನೋಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಅದು ಒಂದು ಎಷ್ಟು ಒಂದು ಫೆಟಿಗ್, ಒಂದು ಡಿಪ್ರೆಷನ್, ಒಂದು ದಿಸ್ ನೋ ಹೋಪ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಅಷ್ಟು ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ಕಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಆದ್ರೂ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬೆಳವಣಿಗೆ ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ನೋಡ್ದಂಗೆ ಶಿವಮೊಗ್ಗ ಒಂದು ಹೊಸ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ಆಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ, ನಮ್ಮೂರು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಶಾಂತಿಯುತವಾಗಿದ್ದಿದ್ದು ನಾನು ಚಿಕ್ಕವಳಿಂದ ಹೋಗ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೆ ರಜದಲ್ಲಿ, ನಮ್ಮಮ್ಮ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡೋಗೋರು. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಎಲ್ಲ ಜಾತಿಯು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗೇ ಇದ್ದರು. ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಆಗ್ತದೆ, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರಂಗೆ. ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತ ಕಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಅದೇ ಅಲ್ಲದೆ ಈ ನಡುವೆ ನೋಡ್ತಿರೋದು ಹಿಜಾಬ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಆಗಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ಬಿಲ್ಕಿಸ್ ಬಾನು, ಅದಂತೂ ಭಾಳ ಡಿಸ್ಟರ್ಬ್ ಆಯಿತು ನನಗೆ. ಗೌರಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು ಏನು ಹೇಳಿರೋರು ಈ ಸಿಚುವೇಷನ್ಲಿ? ರೇಪಿಸ್ಟನ್ನು ತಂದು ಹಾರ ಹಾಕಿ ಸ್ವೀಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಆಚರಣೆ ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಒಂದು ದಿನ ಬಂದಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶಕ್ಕೆ ಏನಾಗಿದೆ ಅಥವಾ ನಮಗೇನಾಗಿದೆ, ಇದು ಬರೀ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಷಿಯನ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ನಾನು ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗಷ್ಟೇ ಒಂದು ಸತಿ ಡಾಕ್ಯುಮೆಂಟ್ರಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೆ ಗೌರಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಫ್ರೀ ಪ್ರೆಸ್ ಅನ್ಲಿಮಿಟೆಡ್ಗೆ. ಆವಾಗ ರವೀಶ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸ್ಟ್, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರಾಗ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಇಂಟರ್ವ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಕೇಳಿದೆ, ಇಸ್ ದೇರ್ ಎನಿ ಹೋಪ್, ವಿಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಇಫ್ ದ ರೆಜಿಮ್ ಚೇಂಜಸ್, ಇಫ್ ದ BJP ಈಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ದೇರ್, ವಿಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಅಂತ. ಅವ್ರಂದ್ರೆ ನೋ, ಇಟ್ ವೋಂಟ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಆರ್ ವೆಪನೈಸ್ಡ್. ಜನರ ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅಸ್ತ್ರ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ನೀವು ಗುದ್ದಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಆಗಿರೋ ಒಂದು ಸಿಚುವೇಶನ್ ತಂದು ಇಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಯಾರೇ ಬಂದರೂ ಅದು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗಲ್ಲ, ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದೊಂದು ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಇದಾದಮೇಲೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಹೇಳಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ಇವರು ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್ ಅಥವಾ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ಇದ್ದು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಅಥವಾ ನಮ್ಮ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿಗೆ ಇದು ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಐ ಆಮ್ ವೆರಿ ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಫುಲ್ ಟು ಹಿಮ್, ಐ ಆಮ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪಿ. Arundhati, of course, I'm very happy she's here. We've been calling her many times, but she's not had the time, or she was preoccupied with other things, or it didn't work out whenever we called you. And thank God you come this time. I'm very happy for that. And in fact, Gauri published your first book, I think, in Kannada, December 13th. ಅಂತ ಗೌರಿ ಅವರ ಪ್ರಕಾಶನ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಅರುಂಧತಿ ಅದು ಅನುವಾದ ಮಾಡಿದ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ. And it went, people read, and you were part of the introduction to Kannada audience that way. And I'm happy Gauri did that. And one more thing, last thing I want to say is, Professor Sridhar message ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ರು ಮೊನ್ನೆ, ಅರುಂಧತಿ ಬರ್ತಾರ, ಅವ್ರ ತಾಯಿ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ, ಮೊನ್ನೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವ್ರು ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. I'll just read that out and end it, because I know all of you are waiting for Prakash to listen to Prakash. Looking forward, my mother would be ashamed of me if I did not speak in Gauri's memory. And I think that's very beautiful. Thank you, Arundhati. Thank you, everybody. ಮುಂದೆ ಹೀಗೆ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಇರಲಿ, ಮುಂದೆ ಇದೇ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಿಂದ ಹೋರಾಟನ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ನನ್ನ ಭಾಷಣ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸೊ ಮಚ್.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಮೇಡಮ್. ಗೌರಿ ಮೆಮೋರಿಯಲ್ ಟ್ರಸ್ಟು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ಆಯೋಜನೆಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಮಿಂದ ನೆರವನ್ನು ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಸರೋವರ್ ಅವರು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಬಳಿ ಡಬ್ಬವನ್ನು ತರ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಧ್ಯವಾದಷ್ಟು ನೆರವನ್ನು ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಮನವಿಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಮತ್ತೊಂದು ಮನವಿ, ಅರುಂಧತಿ ರಾಯ್ ಅವರ ತಾಯಿ ತೀರ್ಕೊಂಡು 3 ದಿನಗಳಾಗಿರೋದು. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಇದು ಅವರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಾವು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಮುಗಿದ ನಂತರ ಸೆಲ್ಫಿ ತೊಗೊಳ್ಳೋದು ಈ ಥರದ್ದೇನಿದೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಭಾಳ ಮುಜುಗರ ತರುವಂತಹ ಇದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಮನವಿಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತೇವೆ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಅವರು ತಾಯಿಯನ್ನು ಕಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ನೋವಿನಲ್ಲಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಆದರೂ ಕೂಡ ಗೌರಿಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಅವರು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಬಂದು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಸೇರಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಎಲ್ಲರಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಮನವಿಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತೇವೆ. ಸೊ ಇದೀಗ ಆಗ್ಲಿಂದ ನಾವು ಕಾಯ್ತಾ ಇರುವಂಥದ್ದು ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾಷಾ ನಟರು.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಇವತ್ತು ಬಹಳ ಆಶಾದಾಯಕವಾದ ಸಂಜೆ. ನನಗೆ 3 ಹೆಣ್ಮಕ್ಳನ್ನು ನೋಡಿದೆ, ಗೌರಿ, ತೀಸ್ತಾ ಮತ್ತು ಅರುಂಧತಿ ರಾಯ್. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. 5 ವರ್ಷಗಳಾಯಿತು, ನಮಗೂ 5 ವರ್ಷ ವಯಸ್ಸಾಯಿತು. ನಿನ್ನೆ ರಾತ್ರಿ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ಭೋರನ್ನು ಮಳೆಯಿಂದ ನಾನು ಏರ್ಪೋರ್ಟಿಂದ ನನ್ನ ರೂಮಿಗೆ ಬರೋ ಅಷ್ಟೊತ್ತಿಗೆ 2 ಗಂಟೆ ರಾತ್ರಿ ಆಗಿತ್ತು. ಗೌರಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೆ. ಒಂದು 2-3 ದಿನಗಳಿಂದ ಕೆಲವು ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನು ಓದ್ತಿದ್ದೆ. ತೇಜಸ್ವಿಯರ ಪತ್ರಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಓದ್ತಿದ್ದೆ. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅನಂತಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು, ತೇಜಸ್ವಿಯವರು ಗೌರಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಜಗಳ ಆಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದರು. ಆಕೆಯ ಪ್ರಯಾಣ ಬಹಳ ನನಗೆ ಆಶ್ಚರ್ಯವಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಆ ಬೆಳಗಿನ ಬೆಳಕಲ್ಲಿ ಜನ ಸೇರೋಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಂಚೆ ಗೌರಿಯನ್ನು ಸಮಾಧಿಗೆ ಹೋಗೋಣ ಅಂತ ಹೊರಟೆ. ಮಳೆ ಬಿದ್ದು ಊರು. ಆ ಚಾಮರಾಜಪೇಟೆ ದಾಟಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಈದ್ಗಾ ಮೈದಾನ ನೋಡಿದೆ. ಸುತ್ತಲೂ ಬೇಲಿ. ಅಷ್ಟು ಬೆಳಿಗ್ಗೆ ಪೊಲೀಸರು ಕಾಯ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಬತ್ತಲೆಯಾಗಿ ಆ ಈದ್ಗಾದ ಮುಸ್ಲಿಮ್ನ ಒಂದು ಗೋಡೆ ನಿಂತಿದೆ. ಒಂದು 10-8 ಕುರಿಗಳನ್ನ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು, ಒಂದು 4 ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಚೇರ್ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕುರಿ ಮಾರಾಟ ಮಾಡೋರು ಆ ಬೇಲಿ ದಾಟಿ ಯಾರಾದ್ರು ಬಂದು ಕುರಿನ ಕೊಂಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾರ ಅಂತ ಕಾಯ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಈ ವಾತಾವರಣ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ಎಚ್ಚರದ ಧ್ವನಿಯಾಗಿದ್ಲು ಗೌರಿ ನೆನಪಾಗಾಯ್ತು ನನಗೆ. ಈ ವಾತಾವರಣ ಬರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಂಚೆ ಈ ಥರದ ಒಂದು ವಾತಾವರಣ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ಎಚ್ಚರದ ಧ್ವನಿ ಯಾಕೆ? ಗೌರಿ ಹೋಗಿ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಕೊಂದೋರು ಜೈಲಿನಲ್ಲಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ನೊಂದೋರು ನಾವಿಲ್ಲಿ ಸೇರಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಆದರೆ ಕೊಲ್ಲಿಸಿದವರು ರಾಜ್ಯ ಆಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ದೇಶ ಆಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಈ ಭಾವಾರ್ಥ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗಬೇಕು. ಇವತ್ತು ಬಿಲ್ಕಿಸ್ ಬಾನು ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಬಿಲ್ಕಿಸ್ ಬಾನು ಅಲ್ಲ. ಆ 11 ಜನರನ್ನ ಬಿಡುಗಡೆ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ ಹಿಂದಿನ ಭಾವ ಏನು, ಅದರ ಗರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿದೆ ಏನು ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು. ನೀವು ನಮ್ಮ ಐಡಿಯಾಲಜಿಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಅತ್ಯಾಚಾರ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಕಾಪಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ಇನ್ನೂ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದೇ ಅದು. ಅದನ್ನು ಇನ್ನೂ ಸ್ಪಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಮಿತ್ ಶಾ ಅವರು ಮೊನ್ನೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಜೈಲಿನ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಜನರ ಪರಿಕಲ್ಪನೆ ಬದಲಾಗಬೇಕು. ನಿರಪರಾಧಿಗಳು ಕೂಡ ಅದರ ಅರ್ಥ ಜೈಲಿಗೆ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅವನ ಅಪರಾಧಿ ಅಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. ನೋಡಿ ಕಳ್ಳರು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾನು ಟ್ವೀಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ, ಅಂದರೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದಷ್ಟು ಹಾರ ತುರಾಯಿಗಳನ್ನು ರೆಡಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ ನಾವು ಅಂತ. ಅಂದರೆ ನಮಗೆ ಕಣ್ಣಿಗೆ ಕಾಣದ, ಕೈಗೆ ಸಿಗದೇ ಇರುವಂಥ ವೈರಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆನೇ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಆದರೆ ಇವತ್ತು ನನಗೆ ಬಹಳ ಖುಷಿ ಅಂದರೆ ತೀಸ್ತಾ ಭಾಷಣವನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿ ಇವತ್ತು ವಿಡಿಯೋ ಮೂಲಕ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ದು. ಒಬ್ಬ ಹೆಣ್ಣುಮಗಳು, ಎಲ್ಲ ಹೋರಾಟಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗಿಯಾಗಿರುವ ತೀಸ್ತಾ ಅರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾರೆ, 2 ತಿಂಗಳಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಬಂದು ಮಾತನಾಡಿದ ಮಾತನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿದ್ವಿ ಇವತ್ತು. ಆಕೆ ಹತಾಶೆಯಿಂದ ಮಾತಾಡಲಿಲ್ಲ, ತನ್ನ ನಂಬಿಕೆಯನ್ನು ಬಿಟ್ಟುಕೊಟ್ಟಿಲ್ಲ. ಆಕೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ದು ಗೌರಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಏನು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ಲು, ಗೌರಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ಜೈಲಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗಿದೆ, ಮಹಿಳೆಯರ ಹಕ್ಕುಗಳು ಹೇಗಿದೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿಯ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಹೇಗಿದೆ, ಜೈಲು ಹೇಗಿತ್ತು. ಅಂದರೆ ಗೌರಿ ಆಗಲಿ, ತೀಸ್ತಾ ಆಗಲಿ, ಇಲ್ಲಿರುವ ಅರುಂಧತಿ ಆಗಲಿ, 3 ಜನ ಹೆಣ್ಮಕ್ಳು ಹತಾಶೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಹೋಪ್, ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಯನ್ನು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಅದನ್ನು ಅರ್ಥೈಸುವುದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವೇನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಇವತ್ತು ಅರುಂಧತಿಯವರು ಮಾತಾಡಿದ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾತುಗಳ ಹಿಂದಿದ್ದ ಅದೇ, ಹೋರಾಡಬೇಕು ಸ್ವಾಮಿ, ನಮಗೇನಿದೆ ಬೇರೆ ಕೆಲಸ. ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕೂಡ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. 5 ವರ್ಷಗಳ ನಂತರ, ಅಂದರೆ ಗೌರಿ ಹತ್ಯೆಯ ನಂತರ ಬಹಳ ದೊಡ್ಡ ನಾನು ಧ್ವನಿ ಆದೆ. ಹೌದು, ಒಬ್ಬ ಕನಯ್ಯ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಒಬ್ಬ ಶೈಲಾ ರಶೀದ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಅಥವಾ ಉಮರ್ ಖಾಲಿದ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಅಥವಾ ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ಅರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಆದ ಜುಬೇರ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ತೀಸ್ತಾ ಇರ್ಬೋದು. ನಾನು ತೀಸ್ತಾ ರಿಲೀಸ್ ಆಗೋಕ್ಕೆ 3 ದಿನಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಂಚೆ ನಾನು ಕವಿತಾ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ, ವಿ ಆರ್ ಟ್ರೈಂಗ್ ಟು ರೀಚ್ ಔಟ್ ತೀಸ್ತಾ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಉಮರ್ ಖಾಲಿದನ ಜೊತೆ ಆಗಾಗ ನನಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಮಯ ಸಿಗುತ್ತೆ. ಬಟ್ ಆ ಥರ ಮಾತಾಡಿದಾಗ ಅವನ್ನ ಜೈಲಿನಲ್ಲಿದ್ದಾನೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ಅನುಕಂಪ ತೋರಿಸೋದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಅವನು ನನಗೆ ಕೊಡುವಂತಹ ಶಕ್ತಿ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಹೀ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ನಾಟ್ ಬಿ ಬ್ರೋಕನ್. ಹಿ ಸೇಸ್ ಐ ಆಮ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರಾಂಗ್, ದೇ ಕಾಂಟ್ ಶಾಟರ್ ಮೀ, ಡೋಂಟ್ ವರಿ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಮೀ, ಹೌ ಆರ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಔಟ್ಸೈಡ್ ಅಂತಾನೆ. ನೋಡಿ ಆಶಾವಾದದ ಹೋರಾಟ, ನೋಡಿ ಅಂತಹ ಆಶಾವಾದದ ಹೋರಾಟ. ನಾವಿಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮೆಲೋಡ್ರಾಮ್ಯಾಟಿಕ್ ಆಗಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಜೈಲಿಗೆ ಹಾಕಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ. ಜೈಲಿಗೆ ಒಳಗೋಗಿರೋರು, ಆ ನೋವನ್ನು ಅನುಭವಿಸ್ತಿರೋರು, ಆ ಏಕಾಂತವನ್ನು ಅನುಭವಿಸ್ತಿರೋರು, ಇದು ನಿಜವಾದ ಹೋರಾಟ ನಮಗೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿರೋದು. ಮತ್ತು 5 ವರ್ಷಗಳ ನಂತರ ನಾವು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿರೋದು, ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಅದು ಲೆಫ್ಟ್ನವರು ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಲಿಲ್ವಾ, ಕಾಂಗ್ರೆಸ್ನವರು ದೂಷಣೆ ಮಾಡಿದೆ ಅಲ್ಲ. ನೀವು ಇತ್ತೀಚಿನ 5 ವರ್ಷಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಜವಾದ ಆಂದೋಲನ ನಡೆದಿರೋದು ಆ್ಯಕ್ಟಿವಿಸ್ಟ್ಗಳಿಂದ ಅಲ್ಲ. ರೈತರ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳು ರೈತರು ತೀರಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರ ಆಂದೋಲನ ದೊಡ್ಡದಾಗಿದೆ. CA NRCಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಮುಸ್ಲಿಮರೇ ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರು, ಹೆಣ್ಮಕ್ಳು ಫೈಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದು. ಅಂದರೆ ನಮಗೇನು ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಬುದ್ಧಿಜೀವಿಗಳು ಅನಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋ, ಆ್ಯಕ್ಟಿವಿಸ್ಟ್ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋ ನಮ್ಮಿಂದ ಏನೂ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಈ ಭಾರತ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿರುವ ಜಾತಿ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಹಾಗೆ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಈಗೋ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಈಗೋ ಇನ್ನೊಂದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇವತ್ತು BJPನೋ RSSಯೋ ಪ್ರಾಬಲ್ಯ ಆಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಿಮ್ಮೊಳಗಿರೋ ಕಿತ್ತಾಟ ಮತ್ತು ಈಗೋಗಳೇ ಕಾರಣ. ಈ 4 ಜನರಿಂದ, ಈ 5 ಜನರಿಂದ, ಈ 3 ಹೆಣ್ಣು ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಂದ ಇವತ್ತು ಗೌರಿಯ ನೆನಪಿನಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಕಲಿಯೋದು ಸಾಧ್ಯ. ಆದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಎಲ್ಲ ಈಗೋಗಳನ್ನು ಮರೆತು ಅತಿ ಬುದ್ಧಿವಂತರ ಥರ ಪ್ರದರ್ಶನ ಮಾಡದೆ ಅವರ ನಂಬಿಕೆಯನ್ನು, ಅವರ ಆಶಾವಾದವನ್ನು, ಗೌರಿದಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ತೀಸ್ತಾದಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಅರುಂಧತಿ ರಾಯದಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಉಮರ್ ಖಾಲಿದ್ದಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಅದನ್ನು ನಮ್ಮೊಳಗೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಬಿತ್ತನೆ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಗೌರಿಯನ್ನು ನಾವು ಮಣ್ಣು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ, ನಾನೊಂದು ಮಾತು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದೆ, ನಾನು ಗೌರಿಯನ್ನು ಹೂಳ್ತಿಲ್ಲ, ಗೌರಿ ಎನ್ನುವ ಬೀಜವನ್ನು ಬಿತ್ತುತ್ತಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಅದು ಹೆಮ್ಮರ ಆಗಲೇಬೇಕು. ನಾನು ಇಡೀ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಓಡಾಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಈ ಮಧ್ಯ ಕೆಲವರು ಜನರ ಜೊತೆ ನಾನು ಇಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾರಣ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತಲ್ಲ, ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಕೆಲವರು ಮಾರ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರವ್ರು ನೋಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ಅವರಿಂದ ಈ ದೇಶ ಉದ್ಧಾರ ಆಗಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಿದೆ. ಇಡೀ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಸುತ್ತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ, ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬರ ಜೊತೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಇನ್ಮೇಲೆ ಆಗೋದಾದರೆ ನಾವು ಪ್ರಾಮಾಣಿಕವಾಗಿ ಜನರ ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ನಿಂತು ಜನಾಂದೋಲನದ ಮೂಲಕ ಮಾತ್ರನೇ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬದಲಾವಣೆ ಇರೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ. ಮತ್ತು ಬಹಳ ಆಶಾದಾಯಕವಾದ ವಿಷಯ ಅಂದರೆ ಅರುಂಧತಿಯವರು ಹೇಳಿದಾಗೆ ನಾವಿನ್ನೂ ಅಂಥ ನೋವಿನ ಅನುಭವಿಸಿಲ್ಲ. ಇನ್ನು ಪ್ರಪಂಚದ 2ನೇ ಮಹಾಯುದ್ಧ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಬಹಳ ಇದೆ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಆರೋಗ್ಯವಾದ ಒಂದು ಸಮಾಜ ಇಷ್ಟು ನೋವನ್ನು, ಇಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಅತ್ಯಾಚಾರವನ್ನು, ಇಷ್ಟು ದ್ರೋಹವನ್ನು ಸಹಿಸಲ್ಲ. ಅದು ಸೆಟದು ನಿಲ್ಲುತ್ತೆ. ಇವರ ಬಾಣಗಳು ಇವರಿಗೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ನಮಗೆ ಸಂಯಮ ಬೇಕು ಮತ್ತು ಬದ್ಧತೆ ಬೇಕು. ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ದಾಟಿದ್ದಿದು ನಾವಲ್ಲ ಮುಖ್ಯ, ದೇಶ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅನ್ನುವ ಒಂದು ಒಗ್ಗಟ್ಟು ಬೇಕು. ಈ ವಿಷಯಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ, ಯೋಚಿಸ್ತಾ, ಐ ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಅರುಂಧತಿ ಫಾರ್ ಬೀಯಿಂಗ್ ಹಿಯರ್, ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ತೀಸ್ತಾ, ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಗೌರಿ, ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಎವ್ರಿಬಡಿ. ಲವ್ ಯು. ಬಾಯ್.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಸರ್. ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್ ರಾಜ್ ಅವರು ಕೇವಲ ಬಹುಭಾಷಾ ನಟರು ಮಾತ್ರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಅವರು ಗೌರಿ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಅವರ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರು ಕೂಡ. ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮನ್ನು ತಾವು ಬಣ್ಣಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ತನಗೆ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಹೇಳಿದರು. ಗೌರಿಯನ್ನು ಕೊಂದು 5 ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು. ಆಗ ಬಿತ್ತಂಥ ಬೀಜ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಅದು ಈಗ ತುಂಬಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್ ಸರ್. ಇದೀಗ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ VS ಶ್ರೀಧರ್ ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮ ಸಮಾರೋಪ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನು ಆಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಮನವಿಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ.
ಎನಿವೆ ಐ ವಾಂಟ್ ಹೋಲ್ಡ್ ಯು ಫಾರ್ ಲಾಂಗ್. ಭಾಳ ಬೇಗ ಇದು ಮುಗಿಸೋಣ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ 2 ಅಂಶ. ಈ ಇಡೀ ಗೌರಿ ಮೆಮೋರಿಯಲ್ ಟ್ರಸ್ಟ್ ತಾನು ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಕಾರ್ಯಗಳನ್ನು ಜನಗಳ ನೆರವಿನಿಂದನೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ದೇಣಿಗೆ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಇದ್ದರೆ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಒಂದು ಕಾಣಿಕೆಯನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗಬೇಕು. ಏಕೆಂದರೆ ನಾವು ಆಯಾ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ಗೆ ಬೇಕಾದ ಹಣವನ್ನು ರೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಯಾವುದನ್ನು ದೊಡ್ಡದಾಗಿ ಸಂಗ್ರಹ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅದೇ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ. 2ನೇದು, ಅರುಂಧತಿಯವರು ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ಈಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಫ್ರೀಡಮ್. ಅದರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಬ್ಯೂಟಿ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಸೇರಿಸಿದ್ರು. ಅದು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅಂತ ನನಗೆ ಅನ್ನಿಸ್ತಿದೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ನಾವು ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಹೋರಾಟಗಾರರು ಮಾತಾಡುವಾಗ ಸಮಾನತೆ, ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿರ್ತೀವಿ, ಆದರೆ ಸೌಂದರ್ಯದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಮಾತಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸೌಂದರ್ಯ ಅಂದರೆ ನೋಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಚೆಂದ ಇರೋ ಬಾಹ್ಯ ಈಸ್ಥೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಬಹುಶಃ ಅವರು ಸೌಂದರ್ಯ, ಬ್ಯೂಟಿ ಅಂದಾಗ ಅವ್ರ ಮನಸ್ಸಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಔಚಿತ್ಯ, ಒಂದು ಪ್ರೊಪ್ರೈಟಿ, ಒಂದು ಆರ್ಡರ್ ಇರಬೇಕು ಸೊಸೈಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ. ಇದನ್ನು ಬಹಳಷ್ಟು ನಂಗೆ ಭಾಳ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಜ್ಞಾಪಕ ಬರೋದು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಶೇಕ್ಸ್ಪಿಯರ್ನ ಮ್ಯಾಕ್ಬೆತ್ ನಾಟಕನೇ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬ ಟೈರೆಂಟ್ ಕಿಂಗ್ ಬಂದರೆ ಅಲ್ಲೊಂದು ಲೈನ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಲೀಪ್ ಟು ಅವರ್ ಪಿಲ್ಲೋಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಫುಡ್ ಟು ಅವರ್ ಟೇಬಲ್ ಅಂತ. ಅಂದರೆ ನಾವು ನೆಮ್ಮದಿಯಾಗಿ ಊಟ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗ್ತಾಯಿಲ್ಲ, ಮಲ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕಾಗ್ತಾಯಿಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕವಾದ ನಮ್ಮ ಪರ್ಸನಲ್ ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು ದಾಳಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಯಾವಾಗ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಕೆಟ್ಟೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆವಾಗ ಹೀಗೆ ಈ ಮೂರನೇ ಆಯಾಮವನ್ನು ಅವರು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಹೊಸದಾಗಿ ಇದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಡೈಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ನಿಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರೋ ಹಾಗೆ ಅವರ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕ ನೋವಿನ ನಡುವೆಯೂ ಕೂಡ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಮಗೆ ಭಾಳ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸ್ಫೂರ್ತಿದಾಯಕ ಅದು. ಅದನ್ನೇ ನಾವು ಮುಂದುವರಿಸ್ತಾ ಮತ್ತೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ನಾವು ಗೌರಿಯನ್ನು ಕೇವಲ ಒಬ್ಬ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ನೆನೆಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಆಕೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗಿರೋ ಒಂದು ಲೆಗೆಸಿ ಇದೆ. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಅವರು ಪೇಪರ್ನ ನಾವು ಮುಂದುವರಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ಆದರೆ ನಾನು ಧೈರ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಗೌರಿ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ವೈವಿಧ್ಯಮಯವಾಗಿ ಇವಾಗ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಪಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಸುಮಾರು 200ಕ್ಕೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಜನ ಹೊಸ ಲೇಖಕರು ಇವತ್ತು ಆ ನ್ಯಾಯಪಥಕ್ಕೆ ಬರೀತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಈ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಆ ಗೌರಿ ಆಶಯವನ್ನು ವಿಸ್ತರಿಸ್ತಾ ಹೋಗುವಂಥ ಜವಾಬ್ದಾರಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಮೇಲೆ ಇದೆ, ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಮೇಲೆ ಇದೆ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಯಾಣವನ್ನು ಮುಂದುವರಿಸೋಣ. 29 ಜನವರಿ ಮತ್ತೆ ಸೇರೋಣ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ಈ ಮಾತು ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. ಧನ್ಯವಾದ. ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಇನ್ನೊಮ್ಮೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ನಾವು ಮುಕ್ತಾಯ ಮಾಡೋಣ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ವಿ ಎಸ್ ಶ್ರೀಧರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ. ಇದೀಗ ಸಮಾರೋಪ ಗೀತೆಯನ್ನು ಹಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ನಾಡಿನ ಖ್ಯಾತ ಗಾಯಕರಾದಂಥ ಜನ್ನಿ ಸರ್ ಅವರನ್ನು ವಿನಂತಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ.
ಬಂಧುಗಳೇ, ಇದೊಂದು ಪ್ರೀತಿ ತುಂಬಿದಂಥ ಆಶಾವಾದದ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಆಗಿತ್ತು. ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಪ್ರಾರಂಭ ವಿಶ್ವಮಾನವ ಗೀತೆಯಿಂದ ಆಗಿ ವಿಶ್ವಮಾನವ ಗೀತೆಯಿಂದನೇ ಇದು ಮುಕ್ತಾಯವನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ದಯಮಾಡಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಧ್ವನಿಗೆ, ಅಂದರೆ ಗೌರಿಯವರ ಧ್ವನಿಗೆ ಪ್ರತಿಧ್ವನಿಯಾಗಿ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆದರೆ ಹಾಡಿನೊಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ತಾವು ಕೂಡ ಧ್ವನಿ ಸೇರಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ವಿನಂತಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ, ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ, ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ, ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ. ರೂಪಗಳನ್ನು ದಾಟಿ ನಾಮಕೋಟಿಗಳನ್ನು ಮೀಟಿ, ರೂಪಗಳನ್ನು ದಾಟಿ ನಾಮಕೋಟಿಗಳನ್ನು ಮೀಟಿ, ಎದೆಯ ಬಿರಿಯ ಭಾವದೀಟಿ ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ, ಎದೆಯ ಬಿರಿಯ ಭಾವದೀಟಿ ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ, ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ, ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ. 100 ಮತದ ಹೊಟ್ಟ ತೂರಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ತತ್ವದೆಲ್ಲೆ ಮೀರಿ, 100 ಮತದ ಹೊಟ್ಟ ತೂರಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ತತ್ವದೆಲ್ಲೆ ಮೀರಿ, ನಿರ್ದಿಗಂತವಾಗಿ ಏರಿ ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ, ನಿರ್ದಿಗಂತವಾಗಿ ಏರಿ ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ, ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ. ಎಲ್ಲಿಯೂ ನಿಲ್ಲದಿರು ಕೊನೆಯನೆಂದು ಮುಟ್ಟದಿರು, ಎಲ್ಲಿಯೂ ನಿಲ್ಲದಿರು ಕೊನೆಯನೆಂದು ಮುಟ್ಟದಿರು, ಕೊನೆಯನ್ನೆಂದು ಮುಟ್ಟದಿರು ಓ ಅನಂತವಾಗಿರು, ಕೊನೆಯನ್ನೆಂದು ಮುಟ್ಟದಿರು ಓ ಅನಂತವಾಗಿರು, ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ, ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ. ಅನಂತತಾನಂತವಾಗಿ ಆಗುತಿಹನೆ ನಿತ್ಯ ಯೋಗಿ, ಅನಂತತಾನಂತವಾಗಿ ಆಗುತಿಹನೆ ನಿತ್ಯ ಯೋಗಿ, ಅನಂತ ನೀ ಅನಂತವಾಗು, ಅನಂತ ನೀ ಅನಂತವಾಗು, ಆಗು 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 ಅನಂತವಾಗು ಅನಂತವಾಗು ಅನಂತವಾಗು. ಓ ನನ್ನ ಚೇತನ ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ, ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ, ಆಗುನಿಯ ನಿಕೇತನ.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಜನ್ನಿ ಸರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ.
ಬಿಡ್ಬಿಡಿ ವೇದಿಕೆ ಬಿಡ್ಬಿಡಿ.
ಗೌರಿ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಆಶಯಗಳನ್ನು ಈಡೇರಿಸೋಣ. ಗೌರಿ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಆಶಯಗಳನ್ನು ಈಡೇರಿಸೋಣ. ನಾನು ಗೌರಿ, ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಗೌರಿ. ನಾನು ಗೌರಿ, ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಗೌರಿ.